Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. We're so glad that you joined us today. My name is Patrick Lyons. I am one of your co-hosts, and I'm here with two of my favorite people in the universe. First and foremost, Patsy Feeman, welcome to you.
Thank you. Always good to be back.
Good to see your smiling face. And Leb Tannenbaum, Leb, back after a little bit of time off. You celebrated a birthday in between our last episode and this one. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. And so great to be here. I'm excited to be in the podcast with Suzanne.
Yes, and there you go, a little lead into our guest today. Listener, today is the first part of a two-part episode, two-part series we're doing with today's guest, Suzanne Hanifin. Today, our focus is going to be on Suzanne as the CEO of Acumen Executive Search, and I'll talk about that in a second. But make sure that you tune into our next episode, because Acumen Executive Search is an executive search recruiting firm. So in part 2 of our conversation with Suzanne, we're going to talk about how do you compete in that war for talent? How can you hire for culture? So a lot of great nuggets will be coming in that one. Today, as I mentioned, we're spending our time with Suzanne, the CEO. So let me tell you a little bit about Suzanne, just to set the mood for the time we have today. Suzanne is the founder and CEO of Acumen Executive Search. She earned her bachelor's in history and marketing at Southern Oregon University, and then an MBA following that at the University of Portland in Portland, Oregon. After college, Suzanne went on to work for a Fortune 500 international CPA and consulting firm, and 2 years later was hired by one of her clients to work in finance with a Fortune 100 telecom company. So she understands big business. Suzanne went on to work for both large and small recruiting firms before ultimately launching Acumen Executive Search, which is a boutique search firm with a non-traditional model. We'll talk about that in a minute. Just a few months ago, Acumen was named one of 2022's most admired companies in Oregon by the Portland Business Journal. So they're obviously doing something right there. In addition to her full-time gig as Acumen CEO, Suzanne is co-founder of LEAP, the Leaders and Executives Across Professions. She's also a member of Vistage and a member of ACG, which is the Association for Corporate Growth. A self-proclaimed matchmaker for candidates in great companies, Suzanne thrives on making connections. Suzanne Hanifin, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Patrick, and thank you, everyone.
Sure.
It's great to have you. So, Suzanne, I mentioned in the open that you launched Acumen with a non-traditional business model. More specifically, that business model is one that promotes a family culture. Now, family can mean something different to everyone. So what does it mean at Acumen? And then maybe help us understand, why did you choose that over something more traditional?
Yeah, thank you. What a great question, because I think when a lot of business founders and owners start an organization, sometimes they just start. And then they get going in business, and then they look behind and go, oh, I wish I would have done this and set things up this way. Well, I was fortunate enough to have worked with so many, startups and tech organizations that when we launched Acumen, we were incredibly intentional about how we were set up. And when I say about the setup, it's roles, responsibilities, reporting structures. And I also knew myself, managing large organizations and large groups, I knew where my strengths were and where my weaknesses were. And so again, launching Acumen, and maybe I should back up and let you guys know, traditionally in this industry, in recruiting, there is what we call, full desk recruiting, which means there are people out selling and recruiting. And what happens is, in a large organization, you tend to compete with your coworkers, whether you're competing with them on the talent side or competing with them on the client side. And so again, when we started and launched Acumen, we said, no, we're not going to compete with each other. We're going to build this culture and be very intentional on who we hire and make sure there's alignment in those goals and values. But we also want to make sure that we set it up to where we can go on vacation and we have each other's backs and we back each other up. And so that intentionality of knowing what, has worked and what's not worked in your industry I think was so valuable for us. But it's that culture and the core values that we never in 15 years have we've ever felt like we've put that aside too. And so that's part of the intentionality as well.
How has that business model, that non-traditional business model, helped you? How has it helped you get from day one to where you are today? And maybe from the flip side, are there any ways where you feel like maybe that's held you back a little bit? And if so, how have you gotten beyond that?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. And I'm going to start with the negative first, because this just happened to us. Because we approach recruiting as a team event, to where we walk into an organization and it's just not me as the founder or the salesperson or what have you. There's like a team that comes with us. And it's the client manager who manages everything in between. And of course, the lead recruiter. And because we're on Zoom these days versus in person, most of our searches are national. And so we had one client or potential client that invited us to a Zoom. And I think he was overwhelmed that here comes 4 of us showing up. And we actually did not get that order. And the feedback when I asked why not, he said, I was so confused on what you guys did. Usually I'm so used to one person and that's my recruiter. And so that was really the first time we've experienced that. So it doesn't work for everyone. Sometimes people just want that one person. And so that was the negative. The positive is, and I shared with all of you earlier when we were just chit-chatting, but I'll share with you, with all the audience. I started Acumen with a 9-day-old baby. And so that intentionality, again, of backing each other up was critical. And it's helped me attract incredible women to Acumen, and we're all women. But more importantly, we're all moms. And so if we don't have that backup and really working together as that team, I don't think I could have attracted such great talent that is here today. And secondly, we wouldn't be able to go to Kauai for spring break with our kids or go see the games because, as you know, a small boutique firm, you're on 24/7 and you're answering phones. People can't interview until after they come home from work, or they can only talk to you on a Saturday. So if we can't back each other up, again, it's so critical for what we do and for our retention.
Oh, that's great. So I'm going to go back to the 3 or 4 of you come onto the Zoom. And when you do that, and most people are used to, I have my one recruit, person. How do you set up with all the success that you've had? Who's accountable, and explain that to the people that have chosen to work with you?
Yeah, and it's fairly easy because we do have our lanes, and it's really the responsibility of the account manager, that the client manager manages both ends of the process. So the sales side, the business development, and then the recruiter. And they're the ones that really, when we find candidates, they're the ones who do the behavioral interviewing, making sure it's the solid fit for the culture. And so there is one person who is ultimately responsible. And we have 3 client managers at Acumen, and I'm one of them. So again, there is the buck does stop somewhere. There is accountability.
So you mentioned that your values haven't changed in 15 years. So I'd love to hear about how, and I think many of the things you've already mentioned probably tie into this, but how are you living your values? And how are you clear with your team about how you do live those values?
Oh, absolutely. We talk about it all the time. We do go away every single January, and it's important that we go away and to really talk about our mission, our vision, our goals. We set a lot of goals together. We have individual goals as well as company-wide goals. But I think that reinstates, or not reinstates, but supports the whole vision of our culture. That not only is it that Acumen invests in this time away, and it's always at a beautiful place like San Diego or Palm Springs or somewhere, but it's also the team building. And when you're in a rented house with a swimming pool for 5 days, you know each other pretty well. You're cooking for each other. We're doing a lot of stuff together. So I think it's that reinforcement of the goals. And it's not just stating them, but as you mentioned, it's living those goals. And when we talk about team and backing each other up, we force each other to go on vacations and not to call. And because it's so important to take that step back. And otherwise, we're all professionals. You start driving and going, and at some point you do need to stop and take that break and kind of regroup with your family, not just your work family. So to answer your question, I really think it's that reinforcement, and it doesn't matter if it's quarterly, yearly, or what have you. If you're always talking about it, it's bred into your day-to-day decisions.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Suzanne, I know, so insider information. you and I reconnected a couple of weeks ago in advance of this to talk about having you on, and in that conversation, you talked about getting to choose who you work with. How do your values play into that? Right, not necessarily taking. There's a key question. Actually, I think there are 3 questions. There's like kind of the litmus test, if I remember correctly. Litmus test of questions that you run through as you and your team are deciding what work to take and what work to not take. Talk about that, because I think that's really interesting to a fellow CEO who is trying to create a great culture, and yet over here, a lot of times we sacrifice the culture or the values for the sake of the revenue or the opportunity.
Yeah, and I'll share with you an anecdote that was such a huge learning, because I think you're absolutely right, Patrick. When you start off, you're taking everything and anything because you're growing your business. You are hustling. You are going. And this was probably 2008, 2009. And if we all remember that time, that was a scary time for recruiters and consultants. And, it was really hard. And at the time, we had a huge national healthcare organization that was not valuing people who did not do direct care to patients, because that's how they made their money. And so, we're working with a headquarters outside of Portland. People are flying all over the United States to interview. And it became very clear that our approach and what we are all about really was not a good match, because they just kind of wanted bodies and let's get somebody in. I don't care what it costs. And then they last for like a year and leave. And so as a team, we all sat there and decided, is this the client we want? again, 2008 and 9. and we really said, no, we don't want to do this any longer. That I'd much rather be home with my kids than spinning my wheels and just being so frustrating and so stressed out. And we let him go. And it was funny, about a week later, their attorney down in California calls us and says, nobody fires us. And I thought, well, we just did it. And it was such a weight off of all of our shoulders. It was unbelievable. The company, we just went, wow. And that actually, we grew so much from that because it freed us up to work with companies we wanted to work with.
Sure.
And we really moved from this, insurance and healthcare. All of a sudden, we're doing all these tech startups, some exciting stuff. It was, oh my gosh. And to look back and go, if we did not make that one really hard decision of, I'm going to give up half my revenue, but the growth out of it was so much. So out of that, we created, did I not mention we're all women? So everything is very subjective, but we created 3 requirements for our clients. And number 1 is we ask ourselves, do they value their employees? And you can tell from one sentence from a CEO if they value their employees or not. And because it's our reputation as a small boutique firm, we want to work with organizations that value their employees. Number 2, do they value people like us and understand we are professionals? And, do they have good relationships with their CPAs and their lawyers? And do they use outside consultants? Those are the type of companies we want. And then the third, which is the most subjective of all, is would I want to work for them? And if the answer is no, then we don't take them as a client. And so again, our approach being this non-traditional business model and this approach of really aligning our values and goals to our clients' values and goals, we are not for everyone. And we always say that. And that's okay, but our clients, we've been so fortunate having, 85, 87% retention of clients over 15 years that it's okay.
We, as you were speaking, it reminded me of a couple of years ago, we had a CEO, Mark Reifenrath was his name, or probably still is his name. I'm sure he hasn't changed it. Mark, he made a statement that has stuck with me 2 years later. He said, your worst clients will fire your best employees. And so you think about what you were just describing, making that decision, because it is, you get the revenue at, on the top end of the books, and there's a lot of chaos that we ask our people to go through to be able to service those accounts. So.
Absolutely.
I'd love to hear what that moment was where you, on some level, or probably many levels, said, this is not working and we need to do something about it. So you as the leader, what was that, what did that take?
Oh, I don't, it's kind of a long story, but in a nutshell, one of our candidates was flying from the Southeast to California, and they had to drive first to Florida to drop off their children and then get on a plane and fly out, and was sitting in the lobby 2 hours later, texting and calling us saying, the person never has showed up. What do I do? Finally, somebody came out and said, go home, we'll reschedule. And it was like, are you kidding? Do you know what this person had to do? They took like a week off of work, again, drove to Florida to drop their kids off with her parents, got on 3 planes to get there, to just be turned away. And that was the moment that, a client, our candidates, we spend an enormous amount of time with our candidates before we ever submit them. So we know them, and the tears and the hurt, and you just said, no, I just can't do this any longer.
That almost has me in tears. So
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Whew. That's quite a story.
Yeah, and we talk about it a lot, about respect, and I think that goes back to that second thing. Do they understand that we're a bunch of, we are professionals. We chose to go into recruiting, and what we do, it's equally an art as a science, and people should be valued, and they can break an organization. We've all seen it. One bad person can destroy a department, and so you need to invest in your people. And I think that's really what it comes down to.
Got it. Nice.
Suzanne, can we go to the candidate side?
Yeah.
Right. We've all worked, in organizations where, I've tried everything I can think of. I need a recruiter, and there is a lot of competition for talent. You've talked about how you screen a potential, organization that you would or would not work with. What's different or the same about candidates?
Yeah, I think it really goes back to our networks. There's 8 of us here at Acumen, and we're all very invested in our communities, in different networking groups. We've been doing this a long time. So I think it's those networks, and having trusted advisors also helps in finding that right person, because you have to remember, you may find 5 people with the same kind of skills, can walk in and do the job, but really you're looking for that one. You're not looking for 500 people. You are looking for somebody that, yes, they need to be able to do the job, but it's really about that alignment of goals and values that really is going to keep somebody in, working there for a long time. And so when you talk about the talent battle, we're not out there looking for the 500. We're out there looking for the one. And when you kind of spin it, it's easier because you cast a wide net, and then you screen out versus screening people in. And I think that's really the secret in getting off this mentality that they must have 10 out of 10 checks. Does the person have the ability to learn and grow and be coachable if they only have 7 out of 10? And so we work a lot with our clients, especially when we're talking about equity and bringing people up versus, here's somebody that has 10 out of 10 of what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned how active your team is. You and your team are in the community, and that's evident on the Acumen website. You have an entire page dedicated to community involvement. You just talked about how that benefits you in growing the network, but why is it important, if we're talking Suzanne, the CEO, why is it important for you and your people to be active and visible and engaged in the community?
Oh, that is definitely one of our values. And I don't know if it's because, I'll say it again, we're all moms. So it's looking at things kind of long-term. It's not the short term. We live here. We want great communities. We want good schools. We want neighbors that are engaged. And so we relocate a lot of our candidates to the Pacific Northwest. And it's really kind of being that eyes open, here's exactly what you're going to get. But it's also helping them to connect into everybody needs a community. So if somebody's relocating from, let's say, the Midwest, what are your interests? And we can help them make those introductions, and it builds their community as well.
That's incredible. That's great.
So we're talking about, oh, go ahead, Patsy.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're talking about the Pacific Northwest for a moment here. And, you know, having lived in Portland for over 30 years and close friends in Seattle, are you seeing any trends? So we know that CEOs listening are always listening for, is there some trend? Is there something going on here that maybe I'm not aware of? Are you placing or getting organizations who work with you who are not just in Portland or Seattle, who are moving into maybe smaller communities, and just your thoughts on how you see that?
Yeah, I think two things came to my mind. COVID helped us tremendously. I think people realize you don't physically need to be in a location to like recruit there.
Right.
So we really started opening up and doing a lot of national searches with headquarters outside of the West Coast.
Okay.
We've always worked primarily San Diego up to Seattle, west. But now we're doing a lot of placements, throughout the country. But I do think the trend is what everybody's reading. There's a lot of core business, cities that people are moving out to the suburbs. And it's not just Portland, even though, we live here and we know that. Look at Seattle, look at San Francisco for sure.
Yeah.
That a lot of these organizations are saying people don't want to commute in any longer. A lot of them are offering hybrid work. And if you go out on a Friday or a Monday, you go, wow, there's no traffic because everybody is working their 3 days on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays. But yeah, I think businesses are following the trend of moving outside of city centers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One other question. So do you participate? Does your team participate in looking at the onboarding process of the organizations to be placed in? Because we're finding that to be a trend, is almost like a national topic. That's how do we onboard in a hybrid environment and make sure the fit happens? Or
yeah, it's so interesting, Levin. I'm so glad you brought this up because this is, I think, the biggest trend that people need to learn. That onboarding does not start on the day that the person starts. It starts when the offer letter is signed. And I'll give you an example. This is how we really help our clients. Today, people are no longer giving 2 or 3 week notices. Today, the average is 5 to 6 weeks. That's a long time for somebody to be in limbo. And it's a long time for an organization to counter offer. Mm-hmm. It's a long time for that person to get a second offer. And so if that relationship is not really solid and kept up, and we say a minimum once a week, minimum. If they're local, it's taking them out to coffee, meeting their spouse, going to dinner, having other key executives on a rotation so that when the person starts, they already know everyone and they know their peers and they know, and they hear, because you're doing things socially like coffee or lunch or dinner, you talk about things that you would never talk about at work. So they come in almost pre-onboarded. And I cannot stress that trend needs to stay, regardless of hybrid coming back, what have you, just because people are giving such longer notice. And so that's how we really help. We calendar this with our clients. We make them do it. And then once they are started, we don't necessarily, we're not a consulting firm, but we have helped them and brought in consultants who help with the onboarding. But usually if they follow a pretty strict calendaring of the pre-onboarding, the onboarding is so much easier.
Wow, thank you. That's really
Yeah.
really valuable to know. As far as
Eye-opening, actually. Yep.
yeah, that's great.
Any other questions before we round, as I like to use the baseball reference, round third and head home with our Let's Get Practical?
I have a question that's still lingering, and that is, you mentioned your annual retreats where you did team building and you got to know each other and cook together. I'm very envious. I'm wondering how you continue that in the office environment throughout the year to keep that going.
So every week we have our Monday morning meeting, and that is, and everybody rotates on bringing breakfast. And once a month, I splurge and take everybody out to breakfast. And it's fun because we get to try new recipes. We're all a bunch of critics, and we really will critique each other and say, oh, maybe you should try this and try that. But and I know that sounds so silly and it's so simple, but it is part of our culture that we love to stop at 3:00 in the afternoon sometimes and have a glass of wine and just kind of say we need to hit pause. So that weekly meeting, I think, is critical because half of us do work remote, and that's the only time we get to see each other face to face. Yeah, I think. Do you want more examples?
No,
or-
that's great.
Okay,
No,
yeah.
it's just
That so it actually prompted one last question for me. We often say, or I often say, that the purpose of this show is to address issues that keep CEOs awake at night. So wearing your CEO hat, what keeps you awake at night?
Oh, so much. There is this responsibility, this weight of having employees, and especially being a service provider. We are not, we don't build widgets. We don't have inventory. We sell ourselves and we sell our services. And that balance between, oh my gosh, we have so much work. How do we balance our lives to, oh my God, we just closed everything and now there's nothing. I still haven't figured that out. And if you guys figured it out, please help me. But it's a hard balance, and we're intentionally keeping ourselves small. We don't want to grow much more people wise. And, just that crazy balance of workflow up and down.
And now I know you're involved in a few different networking groups. How does that help you through some of those thoughts, those concerns, those fears, the concerns? We often, I think it's the saying out there, the two loneliest jobs in the universe are pastor and CEO. And it's often right because who do you talk to? So how do those networking groups provide support for you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've been a Vistage member for a long time, which is CEOs, peer groups, which I think is super important because they'll always challenge me. They'll call me out. Trust me, they're good at that. But I would say as a woman CEO, it's my women's network groups that I think I can be a little bit more authentic with. And they are also women CEOs. And so that balance and the pressure we put on ourselves, they're good at making sure that everybody takes a step back from that and kind of the slap of reality and keeps you humble. That's for sure. But those networking groups, they're invaluable. And if there's any advice I would give to any starting off CEO, it is you can't do it alone. You need friends and family and a peer group, and just for your sanity.
Well, that sounds like a great segue into Let's Get Practical. So thank you for helping us do that. That was beautiful. So CEO listener, this is the part of every show where we ask that question: what can you do to begin making inroads in your organization and in any of the areas that we've talked about today. So Suzanne, you led with find your tribe, don't go it alone. And what other suggestions might you have? What advice would you have for a CEO navigating through the challenges of 2023?
Yeah, I think it's easy to react and to make a snap decision. I think it's much harder to be intentional and to take that pause and to take that step back and being really intentional, whether it's regarding hiring someone, the structure, the model, that is so important. And again, has launched us to where we are today.
Great. Who'd like to go?
I'll jump in with a couple.
Okay.
One is just be very intentional about what type of culture you really want, especially if you're the CEO. We say, and we do a lot of work with Denison, the Denison Culture Survey, and what we've learned is you either have culture by design or default. And so design your culture, be intentional. That's one. I think this trend around onboarding, and onboarding doesn't start at the day they might show up or the first Zoom meeting. That it's you need to engage as soon as the person has signed on. Is fantastic. Something that onboarding itself, even if the person was to start in 7 days, it's still tricky. Mm-hmm. So I think the other thing that I'd say that I heard as let's get practical is build relationships intentionally. And in this case, maybe a little more quickly than you would have thought of before. Relationships are just so important all the way around. And understand your values. And I know there'll be more to be said about that, so I'll stop.
Awesome. Patsy, you want to go?
I would add, take time for team building annually, weekly, so you can get to know each other, so that you can actually talk about your values and so you can have fun. And the other one that we didn't talk a whole lot about, but I appreciated you saying, was know your own strengths. Know what you can count on yourself for. Let other people know that, but also know where you need help. So those were two.
Awesome. I'll add a couple. Suzanne, you were talking about accountability. You said accountability is stronger and better when employees know their lanes. It's one of the first questions that Leb asked. So I think you talked about it. Employees can certainly back each other up, but people need to know where the buck stops. That's important for accountability. You said, and I tried to write it verbatim, but I probably got it 90%. It's the alignment of goals and values that keeps someone in a job for a long time. I think that's, as a CEO listener, if you want to improve your retention, figure out how do you help align goals and values of the people to the organization. This one, everyone needs a community. I thought that was great too. Everybody needs a community. So again, when I think about retention, help your employees find theirs and then help them connect to it, whether that's the physical community they're going to live in or even just the community at work. Everyone needs a community. And then the last one I'll add, and I'll throw it back to you. Use your values and your stated culture to guide the choices around who you want to work with and who you don't. I thought that was a great story, great example, and a great commitment to your culture. Anyone want to circle back around and add anything?
I would just underline what you just ended with, Patrick. We've all, in our careers, seen organizations become almost, captured by a client or the revenue. and you know how much damage can be done and or is done, and maybe that's when they call us and they think that it's about them, and it's really about you need to let go of this client. They're just horrible. So I just really appreciate that you shared that and that you actually bring that to life as a requirement in your company.
Good stuff.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. I guess we've come to the end of our first conversation. Listener, make sure that you are tuning in, looking for episode 2, part 2 of our interview with Suzanne, because we are going to talk about how do you hire for fit. That is Suzanne's, that's her sweet spot. That's what Acumen does. So we're looking forward to tapping into that side of her area of expertise. If you would like to download this episode's Let's Get Practical, you can find that directly from our website at thefrustratedceo.com. And if you have any suggestions for future guests on the Frustrated CEO podcast, please connect with us. Connect with each of us on LinkedIn and let us know. Suzanne, if someone is interested in getting in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Probably through Acumen's website, which is acumenesearch.com.
Okay.
And right there is the list of contact information.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for being our guest for part 1, but don't go anywhere because we still have more to talk about. Leb, Patsy, thank you so much for your contributions. You're awesome as always.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any final words?
Just thank you.
All right.
Enjoyed it.
Beautiful. All right. Listener, thank you again for sticking with us to the end, and we'll see you again on the next episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast.